Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
This Workology podcast is sponsored by ACE the HR exam and Upskill HR. This episode of the Workology podcast is part of our Future of Work series, powered by PEAT, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. PEAT works to start conversations around how emerging workplace technology trends are impacting people with disabilities. Today, I'm joined by Merve Hickok. She's the founder of AIethicist.org and a business process analyst at High Sierra Industries. Merve is an independent consultant, lecturer, and speaker on AI ethics and bias and its implications on individuals, organizations, and society. She is also a senior researcher at the Center for AI and Digital Policy and has over 15 years of global level senior experience with a particular focus on HR technologies, recruitment, and diversity and inclusion. She is a SHRM senior certified professional and a certified HIPAA security expert. Merve, welcome to the Workology podcast.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
I feel like you're one of the few people that I've ever met that has experience in HR, but is also really knowledgeable and experienced in artificial intelligence. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Likewise, I'm really excited to be here today. And you're right, this is still a very small field. So I feel like I know just a handful of people that are interested in or experienced in both sides as well.
Well, AI is touching so much of what we do in human resources and really the human capital space. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your background. How did you get involved in the AI work and digital policy?
Bit of a background. I was working for Merrill Lynch in Turkey. I was country HR manager when after the acquisition by Bank of America. So I worked a lot on some of the technology implementations, platform changes. That was a very generalist role, but I had insight to a lot of the technologies. The company then asked me to move to London to take over this brand new role, diversity recruitment manager for our graduate hires. So I had to build all the executive strategy on diversity recruitment across the colleges in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. That role also required me to be the admin for our recruitment technology, our ATS back at the time. So going around these colleges, talking to students, trying to build these partnerships for a more diverse future workforce, I was hearing a lot about what obstacles they were running into, in addition to being a female, being a minority, people like students with disabilities, etc. They were interested in the industry, but they were running into issues. And with some of these technologies and the practices that we had in place back then, not only the bank, but, in general, our competitors as well, I started realizing that there had to be a more thoughtful approach to this. And I'm a technology optimist. I love technology. So when working with these technologies, with the students, I started going more into AI, and it wasn't very, maybe there was a handful, if even then, HR recruitment technologies that were using AI. So I started looking into those, looking more wider into AI and bias issues and impact on society, on social justice. And one thing led to another. Like you mentioned, I got SHRM certified when I came to US. And I'm wearing multiple hats, founder of AIethicist.org. I'm a business process and management analyst at High Sierra Industries. That organization is a 40-year plus nonprofit in Nevada, developing and delivering learning systems for people with disabilities. And I'm also involved with Center for AI and Digital Policies as a senior researcher. So everything was coming together and has been coming together. I was able to interact with a lot of people with diverse perspectives, diverse backgrounds. That was probably the journey.
Awesome. Well, I love hearing your background experience, and you're absolutely correct. There is so much use case for artificial intelligence, and I feel like it's more part of our conversation as HR leaders. And I feel like so many HR technologies, these demos or briefings that I'm sitting on, they're talking about AI, but it's really sort of a gray fuzzy area for a lot of HR pros. I want to dive right into this topic and ask you, as HR pros are having these kind of conversations, talking to HR technologies, what should we be concerned about when it comes to people with disabilities and using AI technology in the workspace?
You're absolutely right. I see new products coming out every single day, and like that's the next shiny thing or brand new thing. But we really need to be careful about what these technologies are actually doing, and above everything, we need to understand the logic and science behind these technologies. So not all AI technologies in recruitment or HR workspace are bad. There are some really good examples out there, so I don't want to generalize this. But there are also some that are based on pseudoscience, on like really flawed science, or even science and technology that needs to develop further to actually work better. So, what does it mean that they can predict a person's success at a role by looking at their facial features or analyzing their sentiments? Like, how would you feel if someone made a decision about your character and future success, just by analyzing the way you look or the tone or pitch of your voice? A lot of these companies come in to employees. They're out in the market promising you a better, faster, cheaper practice. And I think a lot of the employers are jumping on the wagon without understanding what is actually behind it. But these technologies comes with the definition of what is normal, what is acceptable, what is worthy. This goes for all candidates and employees, not only for people with disabilities, right? So it's impacting all of us. But there's an additional burden on people with disabilities. We forget that there's now more than 1 billion people with a kind of disability in the world, 15% of the world's population. But a lot of these technologies are made by non-diverse teams. They still try to fit people into their own assumptions, their own norms of what is normal, what is acceptable, and continue to refuse to see how each individual can contribute to the workplace. So that's one of my focus areas. One, trying to help HR professionals to help understand this and the possible issues, and also looking at it from a fairness and equity perspective. You mentioned what should concern us. First of all, we know the recognition and analysis models don't work accurately for certain groups. We have seen a number of studies by government agencies, by different researchers and scholars, that facial recognition performs significantly worse for those with darker skins, Asians, women, and those with disabilities. If you're not represented in the data set powering these models, you're not accurately even recognized as a person, let alone having a proper recognition. It doesn't even recognize you as a person. And it gets even worse when you're at the intersection of these groups. Say, if you're a woman with darker skin or an Asian with a disability, for example, that you're hitting a number of these groups. Facial analysis itself, so what I mentioned is facial recognition. Facial analysis itself as a whole, totally pseudoscience. I could talk days about. Some of these technologies, what should concern about us, use natural language processing. So they analyze what you write, what you say, the language and the text behind it. But they're again not able to capture correctly if you're speaking with an accent or if you have a speech impediment, etc. They're also not good at yet. I don't know if they will ever be in understanding the context of what is said or the nuances or analogies that you might have in an interview. And then there's the emotion analysis software that claims to analyze your face to predict job success. Whereas we know that there is no universal way to express our emotions, or that we might be feeling one way or our face says something else. So a lot of these technologies, when you break it down to smaller pieces, you see the assumptions behind it are really problematic. They also try to extrapolate the samples we have to the wider community of people with disabilities. So even if you had some people with disabilities in your data set, that's not reflective of the range of possibilities. We know for a fact that some disabilities manifest themselves very differently across everyone. If you have time, I would like to come back to this again, is about customizing the models according to your company. The employers, a lot of these tools suggest that they can customize their models according to your own current population, employee population. So they ask, who do you define as successful employees, and what features would you like to highlight and optimize? But we know that in a lot of companies, people with disabilities are not equally represented to start with. And the way that unfortunately, a lot of employers measure success, things like longevity in a job, no break in between jobs, promotions, etc., might not really translate to the realities of people who might have to take time off, say, for medical reasons. So what happens is, when you're not fitting into these norms to start with, you're considered an outlier, an error in the systems. And also, you're constantly facing or being subject to these technologies which still have serious shortcomings. So those are the things that really concern me when it comes to AI technology in the workplace in general, but also for people with disabilities.
This is quite the exhaustive list. You mentioned a lot of different types of tech. I feel like a lot of it was recruiting based. We have job matching, we have video interviewing. But what about other types of technologies that are using artificial intelligence that we maybe haven't talked about, other parts of, I feel like, HR or the workplace, that you want to maybe call out and just make us aware that AI is being leveraged in these tech?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, the most troublesome uses other than recruitment are social media background checks and employee surveillance tools. This is the social media background checks. Those are illegal in some states and in some countries, but they are legal in others. What happens is an employer can run social media background check on employees, the current employees, as well as the candidates if they want, and receive scores from these tools. These also are based on some of the text and sentiment analysis. But what happens is, you're not only crossing a boundary with your employees, that you're picking into their private life outside of the workspace, but also trusting these tools to be accurate assessors of a person's tendencies, whether it be it political or social. You might also find things about your employee which you wouldn't otherwise know, which might impact your judgment of that employee. So for me, that is a pretty, like, you're actively going after your employees to get more information. The other piece is employee surveillance part. We started to see practices of this either in the workplace or for those working from home. These might be cameras that monitor your every move at work, and they might be tools that are monitoring your emails or chats and doing sentiment analysis of your interaction. Might be keystroke loggers or screen capture technology that capture what you're doing when you're using a company device. It might be even in the form of a training software that logs your hours starting and finishing a training and how many times you interacted, etc. Or it might be video conference. The latest was a video conference tool that was analyzing your face during the meetings and trying to gauge your engagement. What's so problematic about this for me is, one, like I said, you're not respecting the employee's right to privacy, which became an even more of an issue during the pandemic. But we now have like managers as part of our homes, interacting with our home environment and family. We are part of our children's class, so the teachers are being surveilled, and we're shaping behaviors because of these technologies. Someone is watching you, and you don't have any control. There's that power imbalance between you and your employer. So we can't really fight against it. So the next best thing is shaping the behavior around it. You also tear down your trust relationship with your employee when you start surveilling and collecting data, we don't question the science or validity or ethics of these tools, and we just question the employee and who's working to move your company forward. You start identifying this behavior, this interactions between the employees, and reduce the employees to just data points. What happens then is your culture turns from a cooperative one to a competitive one. You also risk the system to be gamified. Your employees, instead of working towards the goals of the organization, having teamwork, they start to try to game the system to protect themselves. So we really need to question why we're using these technologies, what's the end result, and how we are shaping behavior. And those two are, for me, some of the most problematic ones.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast, sponsored by ACE, the HR exam, and Upskill HR. Today, we're talking with Merve Hickok about ethics and bias in AI technology. This podcast is part of our Future of Work series with Pete. They're the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology.
The Workology Podcast Future of Work series is supported by Pete, the Partnership on Employment and Accessible Technology. Pete's initiative is to foster collaboration and action around accessible technology in the workplace. Pete is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, ODEP. Learn more about Pete at peteworks.org. That's PEATWORKS.org.
This is been so helpful. And for me, and I'm thinking of all the people who are listening now that are thinking about the different types of workplace technologies that they're leveraging beyond recruitment. You said the social media, background checks. I think most of us are doing employee surveys, and, the world has shifted so quickly for us over the last 14 months or so. I wanted to ask you about how we should be talking to our HR technology vendors, maybe those that we're already working with or considering working with and implementing maybe some new artificial intelligence technology for hiring in human resources. How do we make sense? Like, what questions should we ask? And then how do we make sense if their actions or activities, their technology is ethical?
Thank you for that question, because I do this a lot with the companies that I consult with. This is where the proper due diligence comes into play, right? So first of all, we need to remember that as employers, we're still carrying the risk, even though you might have outsourced the process to a technology. When you're onboarding these tools, it's not the vendor that is going to be in trouble if the tool you selected is disparately impacting certain groups or has been built to make decisions on protected classes, for example. You as the employer still carry the liability. That's why I cannot stress this enough, that employers as clients have to be really diligent and ask the right questions. In terms of what questions to ask, I would say first thing first, ask the vendor to explain the AI model or the decision-making process to you. Is it a black box that they don't understand how the technology works, or is it an explainable model that they know that, okay, these are the features that we use to make a decision. The model is based on this criteria. This is how the data flows in. This is the kind of data that we use. And ask them to walk you through that process, and don't take, oh, it's a IP, it's protected information for an answer. It's not a trade secret. You need to feel comfortable that the vendor themselves can actually explain their model. Second is, going back to what I said earlier, is it pseudoscience or not? Why would you use something that has no science behind it or has flawed science behind it? Another question is, are the outcomes similar across different groups? How does the vendor ensure that they are, is, say, white males getting a better results or better outcomes when they're subject to this model than, say, a woman with a disability or what have you? Just like looking at what are the outcomes, how are the outcomes spread across different groups. Asking them what kind of quality assurance and monitoring mechanisms and safeguards that they have. How do they ensure their model is robust? I would ask, I'm pretty involved in building an audit framework for these recruitment technologies. So I would ask them, like, are they being reviewed? Do they have third-party reviewers coming in and doing these checks, etc., etc. I mean, I can walk through these questions for a whole day, but the bottom line is employers, like I said, need to remember that they carry the risk, not the vendor. So if you don't have the internal capacity to ask the right questions, then get external support for your procurement project. Have a trusted partner to help you through that process. It's not worth taking the huge risk and possibly alienate your candidates and contribute to injustices in society as well.
Thank you for that list. I think an audit is incredibly important. One of the other areas that I wanted to ask you about is that not only should we be talking to the HR technology companies, potential vendors, current vendors, but what about educating and kind of broaching these subjects on the dangers of artificial intelligence technology with our company leaders outside of HR? How do we have those conversations? What do you recommend?
Oh, million dollar question. There is a direct correlation between HR practices and bottom line, right? So whether that's in the shape of cost of bad hires, alienated candidates, who, by the way, for certain industries might be also your consumers, so you're alienating a candidate as well as your consumer, or opportunity loss or penalties, etc. First, as HR practitioners, we need to articulate that connection well and understand our risks as well as benefits. We always talk about HR being a business partner or partner to the business. Whether the interest in this AI technology is initiated by HR or the business, HR needs to see the bigger picture and how it's impacting the organization and its culture. Are you bringing in less diverse people? Are you amplifying biases? Are you getting the best candidates with this technology? Not all AI technology is bad. What I'm warning against is don't treat AI as an all-knowing oracle. That cannot be wrong. At the end of the day, it uses data that is created by humans, about humans, and is coded by humans. These tools usually promise that they're going to make your hiring better, faster, cheaper. They can certainly deliver on the faster and cheaper side, but when we're broaching the subject with the leaders, our company leaders, they need to understand that these tools might not always be getting the better candidates, that they are possibly making a trade-off between amplifying biases or possibly discriminating against candidates, and decide accordingly. Is that a risk that you want to take? How is this going to impact your workplace culture? Does this align with your company's values? The outcomes align with your company's values. So it's not only just about recruitment, like a single technology that is sitting by itself independently of the company. It comes to the core, it impacts the core of the company. And I think touching on those points of risks, benefits, value alignment, and long-term impact is the crucial thing.
Awesome. Such good important points to have. The other part that I was thinking of as you were talking was training. Where can HR professionals go to educate themselves and their teams about ethical artificial intelligence and its potential for bias? Do you have any recommendations on where they should go to be able to educate themselves, training, learning, reading, growing, any of those?
Absolutely. I think the first thing I would say is don't be intimidated by it. When we say AI, a lot of people think there's this technology. I'm not a computer engineer. I'm not I'm not a computer scientist or an engineer. You don't need to code or build AI model yourself to ask the right questions and understand the implications. These technologies impact you on a daily basis. It's not only about HR, so you really need to understand the impact of AI in general, what that means for you, for your family as well. So training and understanding this is really, really crucial. There are now a few online trainings about this topic that are geared towards non-technical audiences. I would say definitely follow some of the names in the field who are discussing these issues to get an initial understanding. if you have time, join some of the advocacy groups working on those issues. There are general, AI groups that are working or discussing AI and bias. There are smaller groups that are working on HR and bias, like the ones that I'm involved in. But also, I'll do a shameless plug here. I have a whole website, aiethicist.org, that is built for those interested in these topics, but don't know where to start yet. That was one of my frustrations when I started getting into AI and bias, that I didn't know where to start, and I was going down these like rabbit holes. There wasn't any site that would help. So I curated a number of papers that are rather non-technical that would help you start with that, with understanding some of these issues and debates, and I constantly update that. I also have a self-paced online training on AI and bias and ethical decision making. But at the end of the day, what it comes to is, don't just look at this for HR. It impacts you 24/7, you and your family, and it's crucial that we understand these technologies.
We will make sure to include in the show notes your website, which is aiethicist.org, correct?
Correct, yes.
aiethicist.org. We'll include that, and also the self-paced learning. I feel like this now is the time to educate yourself. I encourage HR leaders to become subject matter experts. You don't have to know it all, but be strong and confident and knowledgeable in this area, because you're not only serving HR, but you can be a point of contact for the entire organization as others have questions about artificial intelligence. And Merve has some really great resources that I encourage you to check out. One other question I wanted to make sure that we asked was, what does a healthy balance of ethical policies and artificial intelligence look like for HR? Do you think we should have a written policy in our employee handbooks and on our website that talks about the ethics around our use of artificial intelligence? Are we going in that direction? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Jessica, for me, it's always about walking the talk. You might have elegantly written policies, but the bottom line is, what are you actually Are you actually practicing those? Do you have a policy about non-discrimination? You might have a policy about non-discrimination, but have you implemented systems that result in discriminatory results? Because you haven't done the due diligence first. How is your hiring contributing to the company's culture and composition, like we mentioned? It's really about, vetting those policies with actual practices. It's not only about recruitment. What are the other policies and practices that might result in either a growth environment or a toxic work culture, like your compensation and promotion and development opportunities? I always say you can use AI in a very positive way to understand your company first. Start with that. Use your data to understand, are there any wage gaps, or what kind of people are being promoted, what kind of people are being given development opportunities. What is the composition of your company and your applicants versus those who are exiting the company? What are the reasons for that? And try to understand that first before you try to fix something or put something on top of what might already be a problematic issue. We've seen a number of big tech companies, establishing their ethical AI policies. It sits on their website. You turn around and they are constantly collecting consumer data, platform data, and using it to manipulate those people, selling their data, whatever. So just having a policy is not enough. You really have to show that you're actually practicing that.
I love that. It really gets back to the training portion, educating yourself, educating your team, educating the organization, and walking the talk, and then following through with the policy and maybe the guidelines and the processes that you've put in place.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not only as you as an HR practitioner, you touch on a great point. Be that person that people in your company can come to ask these questions. Take that lead, but also, this is important for you in your family. How is your kid being impacted at school? Is he or she being like surveilled? How are their grades assessed when they apply to a school or a college? How are they being assessed in there when you apply for a credit? The news that you see. So it's you as a consumer, you as a citizen, you as a parent, you as you, not only as an HR practitioner. There's impact of AI now across, like I said, 24/7. Even when you're sleeping, your Fitbit might be collecting information about you that it shares with insurance companies that make decisions about you. Understand those consequences and advocate for a better world. Like imagine a better world and advocate for it.
Well, Marva, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I've learned a lot. We have some really great resources that we're going to share in the show notes. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about the work that you're doing?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, Merve Hickok, more than happy. A lot of the work that I do, I publish there, as well as if you want to listen to any of my previous work or read any of my previous work, all of those are also included in the AI ethicist org. Happy to connect with especially with professionals in this field.
Thank you so much. I love that you're one of the few, and hopefully soon to be more, HR professionals that are experts in this area. And you have such an understanding. I think that you can really speak to the work that we do every single day as leaders of our organization working in HR. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for the opportunity.
Personal and professional development is essential for successful HR leaders. Join Upskill HR to access live training, community, and over 100 on-demand courses for the dynamic leader. HR Research credits available. Visit upskillhr.com for more. Technology can be a bridge, or it can be a fence. Artificial intelligence has come a long way in the past decade, and we see it everywhere on our career sites with chatbots and automated emails from our ATS, candidate matching, candidate assessment tools. This AI is the grocery store self-checkout, but for HR. As much as we want to implement this new tech, I love me some tech. It saves time in hiring and recruiting, but I want to caution you, we have to pause to consider what impact that technology will have on our workplaces, including employees, as well as people with disabilities. I really appreciate Merve's insights and expertise on this special podcast episode. For Pete, it's part of our Future of Work series. Thank you to Merve. Thank you to Pete. I hope you enjoyed.